Hello, hello.
Hello, hello,
Hello.
hello.
Oh,
Hello,
Hello.
friends.
How's it going?
We have a better technical setup tonight with a proper please hold sign once again.
We missed
Yeah, rock and
Studio
roll.
magic.
Incremental improvements.
it.
So tonight, as advertised, we're going to look through some hybrid scores, and we have a few submissions already, and we would love to hear from anyone watching. Um, we already see, cool, Jolene's in the chat, and I know we've got a few submissions sent through ahead of time.
Shall we first of all, Mike, spend a few words as we were mentioning, because like we kind of said, oh yeah, let's do hybrid music, but it's kind of like a broad genre and kind of like could be a slightly confusing word. So maybe shall we say something about that?
Yeah, I think so. Kind of this came up earlier today. I think Jolene was the one who asked this. Just sort of about just defining hybrid music, and I think in a sense it can be very broad. It's sort of combining anything that is sort of acoustic and electronic, and putting those together. So it could be something that I guess what we typically think of as like these big epic scores that have a lot of synths sort of doubling big orchestra and stuff. But it could also be something that's a little bit more kind of delicate, or maybe has fewer elements to it. That's sort of my general take. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of how I'd interpret it. I mean, in this absolute simplest terms, it's, I guess, instrumental or orchestral plus non-orchestral or instrumental, right? I mean, that's as simple as it gets, but it's not quite appropriate for everything. But yeah, I think what you said, it depends on the size, whether it's like full orchestral or not. But I think, yeah, it's just about the combination of the two and how they work together.
yeah.
Maybe
I think. Oh,
sometimes.
sorry.
You
Go
go
ahead,
ahead,
Shane.
Michael.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I think just a great general definition is the mixing of the electronic and the acoustic. And it's not to say that the electronic sounds can't be imitating acoustic sounds, because to be quite honest, any score mixed today, if you're using samples in the background, I would consider that somewhat of a hybrid score as well. Maybe not in the traditional sense like the Jerry Goldsmith 80s, 70s scores that used very obvious electronic sounds, but really anything that combines live performance with electronic, whether or not that be synths or samples.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe rather than just defining it by what elements it contains, maybe it's more about the aim of it and the goal and the aesthetic, which is to like produce something hyper realistic, like the most powerful cello section more than you could ever achieve in a concert hall through the use of enhancing techniques, whether that be a synthesizer mixed in or combined with samples or compressed and distorted or any way of making something hyper real and hyper, yeah, in your face.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and just kind of on that, that it's you can do stuff in producing music this way that you wouldn't typically do in a sort of traditional recording session, so that you can kind of utilize these effects in a different way. So it's like film music being a recorded art form allows for the process of recording to be part of that creative process. So the producing of it and kind of taking 80 cellos and then miking them super close is part of that creative decision, as well as just getting a kind of big sound.
Agreed.
Cool. Shall we have a listen to some?
Yes,
Let's
Let's
do
do
it.
it.
So why don't we start with the first in my non-chronological order list, and go with Gianfranco's piece.
yes.
Also, hi Gianfranco, good to see you. Um, Gianfranco is one of my students at RCM as well, and well, it's been a moment since we've had class together. So, cool. I haven't heard this yet, and I think most of us haven't. So I'm excited to have a listen. Oh, sorry. Now I need to download it quickly.
Oh,
Talk amongst yourselves.
ready to play on Google Drive, and then there was a problem.
It was not ready to play.
Well, why don't I see if actually that was very
so epic.
So
It's
Yeah, well,
so epic. You have to
meanwhile,
download.
if Gianfranco is watching us from either YouTube or Twitch, Gianfranco, if you are here, make yourself known and visible. And if you wanna maybe tell us a little bit about this piece and like what's the background, what did you write it for, what was the brief, if there was a brief, and anything that you think is relevant would be. happy
One
to-
thing I was going to say, if we have some time to kill, is just thinking about the hybrid thing. Often, maybe it differentiates itself from conventional film score music in that instead of trying to blend into the background of a scene, it is the focus of the scene. Or what often happens, rather, is it's used for a different non-dramatic purpose, or it might be used for a trailer or something like that. A different purpose where the music can be the sole focus.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Although an interesting thing to think about as well is because Jerry Goldsmith obviously used a ton of electronic sounds in the context of orchestral music and was probably the father of integrating it. But there are equal scores where the electronic sounds are meant to be up front, but then you take something like The Explorers, which I don't know if you guys know that score. Do you know it at all? It's great. You should listen to it. Where it's the electronic sounds are utilized, but meant to sort of supplement the orchestra for sounds that aren't quite there, but it blends so nicely and it works quite well. So it's just interesting to see the different approaches in terms of the balance between the acoustic and the electronic and what sort of effects can come from that. It's really, really cool. And oftentimes some of my favorite sort of hybrid moments are when you use amplified percussion in some ways. Like James Horner used to use this modified crotale sound that basically rang forever and was distorted in all these strange ways, but it added this very unique magical quality to it. So it's just interesting to see, yes, how it can be brought to the forefront, but also how it can be tastefully integrated into the very classic symphony orchestra.
Well, he's a good example as well, James Horner. He used like
Yeah.
synth choir as well and things like that that perhaps were unconventional decisions, but
Yeah.
just made it that bit more interesting.
Well, that's the thing with something like on Titanic. Sorry to go on a quick tangent, but like how we listen to the synth choir on Titanic, and it sounds like, to our ears, it sounds awful as a choir sample because it just sounds so cheesy and so dated. But to be quite honest, that in itself is a really unique sound, and I think it actually really works in the context of the film, strangely enough, because the thing is, you would have had access to have a full choir if you wanted that sound, but
No, they didn't. They didn't have the budget.
You think? You think that's the only reason?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I mean, but watch it now.
Titanic
It's
was a
not
huge
dated.
film.
I think he was being sarcastic, Shane.
I was being sarcastic.
Okay, I got caught.
I know the American called out the sarcasm. It's a surprise, but no. The interesting thing is it has that nice breathy quality to that synth pad vocal sound that really, it's sort of otherworldly. And I mean, he didn't go with a really period music approach for 1912 anyway. So it came across as very unique, and it worked in context. So anyway,
I'm ready to go, by the way.
you ready to go?
Okay, let me just say my last thing just to button this thing. Yeah, perhaps I misspoke earlier, Michael. The word hybrid, you're right, is open to so many different interpretations. I was kind of thinking it in one narrow track, but when you bring up these different scores, I think what I said doesn't quite apply to those. So I retract that, and let's listen to the track.
Okay, here's Gianfranco's piece.
Very nice.
Cool. Very nice work.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
I gotta say,
Program was great.
first, that I have so much respect for people that can do this style of music so well because it's something I can't do well at all. And it just sounded, I mean, obviously, because we're listening to a sort of a lo-fi version over the stream, so you guys will have heard it a lot better than we did. So I couldn't get much sense of space, but I really liked the integration of the acoustic and electronic sounds, and it sounded like you have a really in-depth understanding of how both orchestral instruments work and how the synths play in relation to those orchestral instruments. I mean, so many different colors came together and things merged in and out of one another very seamlessly. I thought it was really, really well done.
I think he covers just about all the versions of what hybrid means in one
Yeah,
track.
exactly.
Like he like you said, he had that marriage of kind of orchestral and everything else, but it was more than that. You were doing the processing side that Shane was talking about, which is the production side, which is really clever. There was some kind of more sound design elements, which is a whole slightly different thing. But like percussive elements that were processed, there was, and yeah, it was.
I think it's nice because you'll hear sort of poorly made hybrid scores where it's literally just you'll have orchestral music and then you'll slap something electronic on top of it, and it's just doubling it up as high as it can go, and it just gets louder and louder. Whereas this was an intricately woven tapestry of different sounds and textures that I thought was very effective.
But more importantly than all of that, I think, is that it's just well written. Like, it's good music. Like, it's changing harmonies, it's changing color, it's everything you need from a piece of music. I
really liked it. It's really well done. It's really well written. It treats the electronic elements like other instruments in the orchestra, as it should be. And I really like the music because it's relentless. It grows and grows and grows and never stops. It's really good.
Gianfranco, sorry, Vincenzo.
No, go ahead, Mike.
Maybe you could tell us. Thanks for adding your comment. It's just saying it was written as a sort of exercise, whereas a scene from a feature film. So it's also kind of obviously we're not watching the film, but so we know that it's following the structure to that. I guess maybe you could tell us a little bit about sort of your approach to the instrumentation and kind of why, what you were thinking of how you wanted to sort of combine these sounds and, what the goal was for you with that.
And also, watch what scene of what film, please?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to guess that it's from Exodus, Gods and Kings. But I'm just because that's immediately what I thought of that would have been perfect for that film. But I'm throwing it out there.
If you guess correctly, we all owe you a drink when we can get back to.
I wanted to ask one more thing, actually. So, first of all, I agree with all you guys. It's very well composed. Like, from a musical point of view, it flows very well. And one of the things that I think is a very big risk, especially when you work on a sequencer. And this is something, if you remember, Michael, we were talking about few weeks ago when we were having dinner together. It's just it's so easy to put in things and copy paste. So like a lot of the music that you hear nowadays, especially when it involves, I think, synthesizer or when it's meant to be sort of hybrid, you really hear this sort of like module approach, which is sort of not exactly it differs a little bit from how orchestral music is normally written, I would say.
Well, it's easy enough to just like put an arpeggiator down, play a chord, and say, "Oh, that sounds good. Let's keep doing these chords in the same way," isn't it? Right.
So what I really appreciated in Gianfranco's track is the fact that the music flow from a compositional point of view is very good, and it's always evolving, it's always developing, and it's not just like a loop. So which I mean may seem something stupid, but I don't think it's a given at all. And I'm just like two things that I had in mind. I agree with Ale. It's very good that it's very cool that it grows and grows and grows. But I have no clue what the scene was, so I'd be really interested in hearing that.
Well, he's just mentioned it's a scene of Thor in a cave from one of the Avengers films.
Very interesting. But like I actually felt that it could have had a bit more maybe a climax. As I don't know, maybe it needed to start already quite intense. But I think that when the drums coming towards the end, there's like a section with very intense percussion, and for some reason I thought it's very cool and the climax works, but the sort of textural part of the music, the more intricate the soundscape was already this intense. Maybe it's also a problem of like the quality we were listening to, but like I felt it was kind of consistent throughout, and maybe it could have had a bit more swell in there. And so I don't know if you want to tell us something about this, Gianfranco. I'd be interested, but also I'd be interested in discussing a little bit your approach on how did you blend like the orchestral part with the hybrid part, with the synth part, because it's very well done. And
what choral sample did you use?
Yeah,
I want to know that too.
Yeah, I think I mean, just on the sort of mixing and the programming side, it's very strong, and I think because everything has its own sort of sonic space to exist in, so it's very clear kind of like where the big sound design drums are in the mix, and it's very clear where the choir sits. So talking kind of about this two-dimensional space of sort of like depth and your panning left and right. Everything has its own spot. So I think that really helps this kind of be blended, because it's like thinking of it as one giant ensemble.
I think just going to what you said, V, about the quality we're listening on, I think it's a testament to the track that, to me at least, you guys may disagree, but it sounded great even on the quality we're listening on. I realize that there's quite a lot of compression and things going on, but yeah, it's like, I think that's to do with what Mike's saying, is it's mixed in such a way that, which I guess is a test of a good track in some ways, is that it's going to sound good however it's played. And yeah, I thought, well done on that. It just sounded really good.
Yeah, I don't know how well Zoom, translates stereo, kind of what's sending to you guys. So that might be sort of what you're missing on it.
Yeah, it's hard to get a sense of the space and any sort of reverb trail or tail on it. It feels very small, but as Sam said, everything is very clear and panned very well. Comes across that way.
Cool. So Gianfranco has just said as well that, I mean, essentially kind of he's working out of his template, which is kind of pre-mixed. So, if you know your template very well, and kind of, I think we were discussing recently, we saw, we're sharing a video amongst ourselves of this guy who does this amazing mock-up of Star Wars. And it's something that, when you do something like this and you can kind of, do one big piece, it really helps you to lay that template out. And then you're already sort of panned and placed everything and set your reverbs. And then going forward, just sort of save as, and then delete all the MIDI, and you kind of have your template laid out. So I think that's, makes sense. So Gianfranco was just saying, kind of over the years, he's just been kind of building on top of this and sort of experimenting and combining this.
So I'd have a couple of questions in response to that for Gianfranco. Firstly, so your template set up in such a way, do you regularly write in this kind of style, in this kind of epic hybrid? Or do you have different templates for different purposes? And another question would be just kind of going back to what Vincenzo was getting at, in terms of how you write. Like what we were hearing, I thought compositionally you were really clever in, what the sort of process percussion was doing versus the orchestra. Everything had its place. But what about kind of doubling? It was tough to hear. Maybe because you did it cleverly, I don't know, or maybe there wasn't so much of it. Whether there was much doubling between synth pads and strings or things like that. Could you talk a little bit about how there was more, how there was any combination rather than everything in its own place, which we can hear quite clearly? Hopefully
I think
there were two questions in there.
While Gianfranco is typing, because I think we're bombarding him with questions, but it's again, it's a sign of like how much we liked the track, and I think we were all really sort of impressed by it. So anyway, I just wanted to say that one thing that came to mind was the conversation that we had a few weeks ago here on the live stream about mixing percussion and how it can be tricky sometimes to sort of put them in the right space, to not bury them with gazillion other things. And even with like the sort of compressed quality of Zoom, I still really, really, really liked the treatment of the percussion. I think they were absolutely sitting in the perfect position. They were very clear. They weren't overpowering anything, and they weren't overpowered by anything else. And they were just really organic with the rest of the elements of the track. Both from
Shane, I don't know if.
compositional
Sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say because Shane and I have been talking a bit about this of late, and I wonder if you had that reaction too, Shane. That for me, the thing I noticed was exactly what we were talking about yesterday, about having that sort of real closeness, particularly on the less orchestral percussion, that is really punchy, but then it's also got that sense of space in a really good combination. That's what I was hearing.
Yeah, I think that was
that's kind of
done.
what you were saying.
Yeah, that was done really well on this track, and I think it's probably a good analysis from Gianfranco of listening to other styles of other pieces of music that are within this style and identifying the key things that just make that aesthetic work. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to say what I thought yet, but obviously everybody said it's a great track, and I thought so as well. I particularly liked, and this is nothing to do with it being a hybrid track, but how, as Ale said, the piece is developing and it feels like it's growing the whole time, but it doesn't really feel like it's growing in a linear way, which I thought was very cool. I felt like you kind of go on a journey with it where you're inexorably led to, oh, this is going somewhere. I'm feeling tension and anticipation, but it wasn't very obvious how you were going to get there. And I thought that was really well done. The only thing, if I could say one bad thing, just so that there can be one bad thing said.
One constructive criticism.
One piece of constructive criticism, which was that there was this moment around the middle of the track, and I actually listened through the stream because I wanted to hear it in the highest quality possible. And I felt like there was a little short string patch that was going from 16th notes into triplets, going up in 16th notes, down in triplets. I'm pretty sure that was it. And I was just thinking that even though it sounded pretty good, it didn't sound anywhere near as good and as polished as the rest of the track. And I really do feel like it's a tricky thing sometimes with producing music where one bad sounding thing can spoil the whole illusion in a way. It's like you're only as good as your worst sound, and it puts an immense amount of pressure on mock-ups and programming. But that moment stood out to me as not as good as everything else because everything else was so good. And yeah, I just wondered if you guys had any thoughts about how difficult it can be sometimes where you're like, all of this sounds amazing, but then this bit doesn't sound good, and that's really frustrating.
Were you hearing? Sorry, go on, B.
I just wanted to say that when we bury you, Shane, we'll write on your graveyard, "You're only as good as your worst sound." I think it's like perfect.
Nice.
Yeah.
I was going to say.
Go ahead, Sam.
I was just going to say. I think I know the bit you mean. Was what you were hearing, Shane, that it was just a little bit flat dynamically and perhaps a little bit synthetic.
A little bit flat dynamically, and it also didn't have enough kind of bite to the sound that I would have expected. Yeah.
I guess when it's that kind of aggressive and it's like imagining that ensemble of strings all going for it, you've got to really be the player like violently hitting that string. So you've got to really hear that grit, I guess, is what you'd expect to hear in a moment like that, right? And
yeah,
just finding a way to do that.
I had the same thought with that, and that would be sort of also my solo criticism of kind of listening back, and I think with that it might just be obviously I'm not looking at your session, but it might just be like a bit more attention to kind of the individual velocities and also kind of how you manipulate the modulation and expression to somewhat randomize it. And I think, I'm sure you are aware of this because, the rest of the demo sounds amazing. But then you can also sometimes if I find it's just working with what I have and I don't really get a lot of range kind of out of a particular library or something, then, getting creative to think what if I, combine two different libraries and I slowly have those kind of coming in and out of each other, you know, with velocity or modulation or something, just to imagine like, okay, these are slightly different sounds and I can kind of randomize those a little bit. You know, or one is more static and then another has a much bigger dynamic range. So it sort of comes in and out of the texture.
That's particularly a good way to do it, to kind of have a bed bass sound that you then accentuate, like especially through a crescendo. Not only is your bass sound getting louder, but then you're also bringing in a new one. That can be a really good way to do it.
Yeah. Cool. And Gianfranco's just sort of followed up to say that he, you know, uses this template for a lot of orchestral hybrid pieces and trailer music and that sort of thing.
Cool. But it's clearly successful. Well done.
Cool. Very nice work. There's spent quite a lot of time on that.
Well, it deserved.
To talk about. Yeah.
It deserved commenting and.
So just another reminder, if anyone else wants to share some work tonight, feel free to just drop a link. You know, don't feel put off by the fact that Gianfranco's piece was amazing and it's hard to follow. But don't be put off that maybe if it isn't something that's, you know, sort of epic or, you know, over the top, if it's a different kind of combination, you know, it would be great to get some variety on that side too. So why don't we have a listen to Darren's piece? Thank you, Darren, for sharing once again.
Sorry, we should really plan a badge for Darren.
The loyalty badge.
Yes, yes.
Loyalty.
Cool. I'm just seeing Gianfranco's following up with some comments as well. I'm not sure if you guys can see those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So Darren, why don't you tell us just a little bit about the piece as well while we listen back? One sec. I think I need to reload this. Another anticlimax.
Really nice.
Nice. I'll shoot.
Beautiful.
Let's go for it. Yeah, cool. I thought it's a nice little piece. I think like my main issue with it, I think there's quite a lot of like mid-range bouncy things going on. There's kind of piano, there's what sounds like almost a reverse piano, I think, and then there's
kind of a granular.
Yeah, there's like a synthy bouncy thing as well, and it's there's a lot of it that's often in the same place, and I think particularly with piano and almost anything else, you've got to be careful in your piano writing, because it's so easy to make use of as much of the piano as you can play, right? But when you're combining it with other things, it's like mixing. You want to make sure you're not in the way, and it's just, I think it's just deciding what is the focus at some points, because I think there's some lovely like synthy effects going on that sometimes steal the focus, and sometimes I think, and there are moments where that's much more successful than others, let's say. I think there's moments in the middle and towards the end where the piano and the synth compete a little bit. That was my only thought in the sort of from a mixing point of view, I guess. But yeah, it's a nice piece. It reminds me, it's quite sort of Thomas Newman-y in a way, and I wanted to mention him earlier and forgot in how in terms of hybrid music, he's got a very particular way of writing, which is quite appropriate as well, where he'll get soloists in just to come up with ideas. That will be one element, and then he'll start adding synths, and then he'll record an orchestra, and they're all kind of separate elements. And it sounds like you've kind of done a similar thing here. I think that approach, can be really successful. I think it's just making sure there's space for everything for me. I don't know what you guys thought.
I liked it. It's musically, it's really good. But the only problem I had with it was the same issue you had, Sam. It's like it's not only the frequencies of the I don't know if it's a granular synth or a processed piano. It's not only that they're competing for the same frequencies basically, but they're also the same kind of sound, like a fast attack and a slow release. So it's kind of like a piano. So it's kind of having the two pianos competing on the same notes. But that was my only criticism.
Had some nice colors in it, I have to say. And actually, yeah, Thomas Newman, I get that as well. But it also reminded me of the Giacchino Inside Out score, which is also a really nice use of nice ambient synths, piano, and beautiful bubbly sounds. So I really liked the colors you used.
It's an interesting you mentioned that, Michael, because the Inside Out score is exactly that, but they're always kind of distinct, and there's always plenty of space. And it's always a very crisp. And my memory of it is that it's quite a crisp piano sound.
Yeah.
And with the synths, and I think in this, I mean, maybe is it like a felt piano that I don't know if you guys hear.
What for
for
what?
this?
Oh, for this?
Well, we just.
I don't know. The granular sound, I think it's an Omnisphere patch. I can't remember which one it is because I remember discovering it. But you're talking about the piano sound.
I feel like there's a muted piano of some kind in there. I might be totally off there, Darren.
I don't know. Maybe it sounded almost like regular piano and muted piano were maybe doubled on top of one another and balanced in a certain way, so it has a little bit more definition to it. I don't know. Yeah,
I think it sounded to me almost like some top end had been taken off the piano.
Yeah.
And for me, if it's with all these kind of mid-range synths doing interesting things, I would want to keep some of that high frequency stuff on the piano so it sounds just a bit more real.
Interestingly enough, going back to the Inside Out, generally for that score, if there's a lot going on in the background, the synths in the background tend to be like pretty fuzzy sounding, or they're lacking that front end, and then usually the instrument that's playing the melody at the front has a strong attack like a piano or some sort of bell sound. But whenever you have, because I think the opening cue has this sort of bell sound at the beginning that has a little bit of fuzz to it, but the only reason it really works is because what's behind it is not moving all that much, so it doesn't detract from your attention or the effectiveness of the line. So I guess it's just balancing those elements between action in the back and action in the front, and making sure that the attacks don't interfere with one another, both in terms of range and quality.
Yeah, in this case, could be, I don't know, fixed by just having them on two different octaves.
Yeah, there he is. So Darren said, yeah, so it was felt piano, and then he doubled with it with regular piano to give more definition. So there you go.
Sorry, Darren, just out of curiosity, was it the Noir felt piano? Because I think it's quite a distinctive one, but I may be wrong. I just wanted to add one thing, which is when we were listening to this, I had a moment when I thought, for some reason, in my head, there was an association between hybrid. Well, the thing is, we also sort of put out the message for epic/hybrid music or epic hybrid music. But the thing is, maybe, I don't know if it's just me, I'd be interested in hearing what you guys think, but there's this association between epicness, trailer music, action music, and hybrid scores. And I just really wasn't expecting this piece. And I think, I don't know, for some reason, it didn't immediately click that you can have like this kind of very beautiful and sort of more sweet and and meditative music, which can be hybrid.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, when most people think of hybrid, though, it's probably that the electronic elements are really obvious and really sort of in your face. And I think that's
Exactly.
oftentimes why you pair epic and hybrid. Because I know I pair it in my mind, even though it's not the type of music I can or do write. So I think there's some sort of definition, almost a false definition, or maybe a pigeonhole definition attached to the term hybrid, where, as we talked about at the beginning, it's really anything that's either, you know, not acoustic or not being recorded live, that's, you know, mixed in and added on top. And I think that if we just pair it with epic, you're missing out on a lot of really beautiful music, like what we just heard. So that's a really good point.
Yeah. I mean, again, Thomas Newman is the master of hybrid, you know, in any, I think, any style.
Yeah.
Or
David
genre.
Newman's also got some good hybrid chops.
Yeah, but like if you listen to the Wall-E soundtrack, for example, that's largely like synthesized, and then the orchestras for punches. It's almost like the reverse of trailer music.
Yeah.
It's such a broad term that it's really difficult to like put it in a box.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure. It's quite a short piece. Why don't I play through again? I just wanted to also make some comments, I think particularly on some of the programming in the strings as well. They could help because I think some of this, aside from a bit of EQ and kind of clearing out the sound, I think can really help that out. And then just a bit more attention to the strings can, you know, it feels like it's just a bit more polishing, but that it's pretty close. So why don't I play through again? It's just 1:15. A moment. Google is not on my side today.
Dear Google.
We should ask.
Cool. So I mostly just wanted to say, I think what comes across is most apparent in the strings is sort of the biggest giveaway is you can hear the re-articulation of every note. So you have some nice expression going over, or some nice automation rather, going through your sustained notes. So there's some nice shaping of the phrase of the sustained notes themselves, but then whenever there's kind of a whenever you have a new note or something that's a quick kind of turnaround, we can hear that on each one. So I'm not sure, I know you have, and you've been playing with this sort of BBC Symphony Orchestra Discover with Spitfire, and it might be a sort of limitation of what's in there. But I think also just playing with kind of overlapping some of these notes and things typically helps to tell the programming that it's legato, and it will actually change the way that it plays it back. But I think that's kind of the biggest giveaway. Otherwise, I think what you do really nicely with this is the different textures that you have are constantly kind of evolving. So it's sort of, even in that initial statement of your kind of 4 chords within, that opening phrase, there's always a moving sound, and there's a bit of kind of movement with whether it's sort of a delay on something or it's panning from left to right. And that extra bit of motion, I think, really helps just keep the momentum going forward. It's done very nicely.
Yeah, I think just on the string thing, Mike, if you are using Spitfire, Darren. There'll be a tightness and a release parameter that you can play around with. I would put if you've got doubling Spitfire instruments, maybe have some of them tighter than others, but then I would put the release slightly above, and that can help just blur the lines slightly. You don't want to do it too much, obviously, but as well, it almost sounds like it's either a legato patch with no overlaps, or it's a longs patch that isn't quite working. And I think it needs to have a more legato sound with that moving top line in particular.
And I think everything could also be pushed a little bit over to the left, just because the string sounds, when it changed notes, especially on the faster notes themselves, didn't really seem to line up with everything else. It felt very behind the beat to an unnatural degree, I think.
Yeah, I would almost select that entire top melody and hit extend beginning of note back a semiquaver.
Yeah.
And that would probably do the trick, to be honest, because then you'd have the overlaps and it would be speaking earlier. But yeah, it might not be that simple. I don't know.
I was just going to say, yeah, definitely like the piece. And there's a lot of really nice harmonic choices in there. And I think it's interesting that you talk about a little bit about the background of the piece as a library piece of music, but based on a video. I think one thing, obviously, I get the impression that this piece isn't quite finished, but I really feel like it is missing a third act, if you will. It's kind of building up to something bigger and something grander, and leaves us wanting that. So a kind of a suggestion of how to create that, maybe if you do come to create another minute of music or so, would be to use one of your piano melodies that you've already stated, but now stated in full by the whole orchestra with like strings and maybe brass or something, if you want to include that. That would be a nice way, because at the moment the strings are kind of playing a counter melody sort of role, and you could put them in the front in the next section. That's just a suggestion. The other thing I was thinking was that because this piece kind of feels to me like it's almost like a piano piece, first of all, it is a piece of piano music with some synths, is how it comes across to me. Therefore, the piano is like the most important thing in terms of the programming and the realness of it. I did feel a little bit at times like everything was kind of the same velocity, everything was quantized. I mean, upon the second listening, it's not quite that. That's not quite the case. But I think you could just every bit of love and attention you can pour into getting the pianos to sound as good and as lifelike and as much of a piano performance as possible will be well spent, because that is what everybody's listening to. That is the main focus. It's not like it's distributed amongst the whole orchestra. There's a clear main focus, and then there's other synthesized and orchestral elements that are playing an additional role. So that was just my thought.
As a pianist, I will add to this. I really agree with this. And I mean, it didn't disturb me, but I noticed the same thing. It's very like sort of well polished, well created, well crafted. It could use a bit more human error sort of side of it. And I remember talking with a friend of mine who is from Italy a couple of years ago. He's a pianist, but he does a bit of like music programming and like music producing and stuff like that. And basically he was about to record his first solo piano album. So he's investing more in his sort of pianistic career, and for budget reasons he couldn't afford recording on an actual piano. And I remember that he was telling me that since something that really bothered him was that when he programmed or when he sequenced piano, he really felt the lack of this human error aspect. He basically had some tracks which were simply like there are some libraries, so this obviously depends on the library, but there are some libraries where you have basically everything: the sound of the piano, the sound of the hammer on the strings, the sound of the damper on the strings, and they are separate microphones. I can recommend Steinway Piano Galaxy is a library that does this. And also the Noir piano. You have both the felt and the non-felt ones. And in these libraries, you can literally isolate just the microphone for the pedal, just the microphone for the noise of the strings. In the Noir piano library, there is even a function which I found amazing. It's like the pianist function. And if you activate it, every now and then you will hear like the squeaks of the chair and like little movement. It's amazing. So like, I mean, you can really
The
go.
guy swearing.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Basically, what
about
the
any of
assistant
the
has to
like
edit out.
any of the like Glenn Gould singing along and breathing very
Yeah,
heavily?
exactly. I mean, no, but all jokes aside, so obviously you can really start as exaggerating if you go down this path. But I think I'm not suggesting that you should, by all means, like program these every time, just like the pedal separately and the noise string separately, and then mix these. But if you're working on a solo piano track, so as Shane was saying, if this is like the main focus of the whole music, it may be worth spending some time adding just, it's just like final touches, and you're just refining it to an extra level, and it will just sound more human, more natural. And I think that there's something there.
I think part of that is due to the combination of the two pianos at the moment. It's deciding what is the priority, because it's a nice idea that the sort of more classical piano gives a bit more punch to the felt one, but you run the risk of losing the value in either of them.
But at the same time, though, on a lot of the piano samples, I find that even the best ones still sound a little bit dead in relation to what an actual piano would sound like. So how do you feel about adding something like false harmonics on top of that to give it a little bit more of the natural resonance you would get from an instrument in real life, to give it a little bit more realism? Just because obviously you're not getting synthetic vibrations from the other strings when you're,
Have you ever recorded piano live, Michael? Because like,
have I?
Yeah, or like, have you ever?
Guys, I'm just gonna interject too. We do have another piece that Jolene submitted too. So just to we can start to kind of.
Well, we should
up,
probably
like,
move
give
on.
some
Yeah.
space.
I just wanted to say one last thing in terms of humanizing a little bit the performance. Or, apart from the piano, it could be applied to everything. You can work a little bit with the tempo map, and play with that when you want some ritardando or accelerando. That could be useful.
And just one other very quick thing, it would be worth putting a couple of references in the session, maybe, and specifically I'm thinking the WALL-E soundtrack. Get Define Dancing from the WALL-E soundtrack at the bottom of your session and listen to it a couple of times, because it'll just bring to light a way of mixing it that I think would open things out a little bit more. It'd just be a really good habit to have that something there to compare it to. Sorry, that's my last thing.
Cool. Thanks, Darren, as ever, for submitting, and really nice work on it. I'm excited to sort of see where you take it. So we've got a piece from Jolene, who's just submitted that into the comments. It's called Alita Battle Angel version 2.
Ooh.
So just to get an idea of what it may have been for.
I was about to say, Sam, can you guess what movie it's from?
Yeah.
Yes.
So thanks, Jolene, for saying this in. Let's have a play. Oh, I got to download. One
So
second.
amongst yourselves.
It's gonna
So
take
what-
it's gonna take a second. So
Much
don't-
like your file, your head is also in the cloud.
Don't. Okay, it's here. So
Okay.
but before I let someone get on a tangent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
That ending's just like a game show.
I know, that's what I was thinking. It sounds like a
And
news
welcome.
program.
Welcome to Alina
unexpected.
Battling.
The nightly news.
Totally unexpected.
Oh, can I hop on real quick before I forget my comments real
Yeah.
quick? I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it a lot. One comment I had was there's one particularly big drum hit that sounded like there was a ton of reverb, and just because we're listening to a lo-fi version, I mean, Mike and I don't know, maybe Shane, you're listening over the stream. Did it feel like it was going to be too much reverb if you heard it at a higher def, or was it okay?
No, I think that was fine. You know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I like that
Yeah.
hit. I thought that was one of the best sounding hits.
Right.
Are we
Okay,
talking-
it's just sort of hard to hear over the lower quality
Yeah.
of the.
Are we talking about the sort of Terminator style one? Because like there was a section
yeah,
where
one
there
of
were
the
like
first
heavy
things you hear.
drums sort of.
Yeah, yeah.
Because like I had the same impression as you, Michael. I thought that there was a lot of reverb, as in maybe too much. It felt like the reverb was very, very, very compressed. So
Yeah,
it
well,
made-
it just sounded like it wasn't exactly matching what
yeah.
else was going on. But then again, it was also listening to the low quality version over the stream. The other thing I was going to point out was the horn bit, the brass bit. I couldn't actually hear if it was horn and trombone or just horn. But to me, it felt like a lot of the automation parameters could have been messed with a little bit more, especially like modulation and all that, really to give a sense of the sound evolving. And I have to say, speaking as a wind player, when it comes to writing, make sure that we're considering breathing as well. And I think actually giving a little bit of space where the players would need to breathe. And a simple way to do that if you're not a wind player is just as it's playing along, just blow out air and see if you could sustain it for a certain amount of time. Then just give it a little bit of a break, because that in and of itself will already give the impression of more realism. But it felt very like almost organ paddy. The sounds didn't seem to increase in volume or increase in velocity at all. And it just felt a little bit too flat, I think, because it's a really cool moment. I think you could breathe a lot of life into it by doing a little bit of automation.
Yeah,
So
you're
just
so
to-
right. If you give that to a brass player in a session, they're just going to give it so much welly. They're just
Yeah.
going to have all the shape in the world. Like they're going to hit the beginnings of every note with like a tenuto and then swell up to. It's just
Yeah.
going to be massive, and you have to make it sound like that for sure.
Just give some context too. Jolene's mentioned, so she rescored the trailer, and this was actually part of her application to the RCM Masters program.
Oh yeah.
That's pretty cool. So there
Better
was,
than
I had
mine.
sort of two kind of more broad ideas. One, I think that there's a lot of the electronic elements that I think, particularly in the opening sort of 45 seconds, that are pretty static. It's kind of, just holding a note and then letting that sound, just sort of hold out. And it almost feels like we're sort of waiting for the next note, where I think a big benefit of when you're using electronics is like how they can evolve, how you can shift the color and that timbre can change over the course of a sound, much more so than most acoustic instruments. You can't really change the timbre of a cello note so wildly over a single sustained pitch, unless you're really doing, a lot to it. But with electronics, that's sort of inherent to it. So I think a lot of the sections that use these different electronic instruments, you can think of that as like a starting point, and then allow that color to sort of shift and change, and that will keep the momentum moving. And then I think just on the programming, another thing where I think it was noticeable when the horns came in is where the samples are. If everything is perfectly quantized in the session, some are speaking earlier and later than others. So I think it sounded a little out of time. Like the horn sounded like it was speaking very late. So you'd probably want to shift all of those samples, all the MIDI notes forward a little bit. And then I think probably the percussion is probably a guide. And then maybe the strings were possibly a little bit earlier. Those could have been slightly late too, but not as late as the horn. So it just seemed like, I think with those, to try to make everything feel like it's really sort of in the pocket with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'll help it a lot.
I had a few thoughts on what you said there, Mike. Like at the beginning, I had a question for the group actually, and for Jolene, if she can answer. The beginning, is it an oboe or is it a synth? At the very beginning.
I would
Is it-
guess
Can you
it's
play
a
it
synth.
again? Yeah, I was about to say, I don't think it's an oboe.
Okay, it sounded kind of oboe to me, but it sounded very flat dynamically and a very regular vibrato sound.
You mean this?
That.
It's a synth sound. Yeah.
I think it's a synth.
I think it.
As Mike was saying, you can achieve some movement with filters a lot. So you filter out high frequencies and you bring them back in, and then you cut off low frequencies. That gives you, even if you're holding one note for 20 seconds, it gives it a lot of movement.
Yeah,
I think this is what makes kind of like the cinematic sound. If you think, I mean, if you listen to any sort of cinematic soundtrack or any cinematic piece of music, all the synth, or like, I don't want to generalize, but most of the times I have the impression that any synth line, like there's always something bubbling and shifting and changing. There's never just a synth pad or a pad patch just going all the way through. And I remember having this discussion with you, Mike, a while ago, like how important it is to, like, whenever you have these drones or these long sounds, these pads, to always kind of keep it evolving and changing. Otherwise, your ear just picks it up immediately and you get sort of, oh, okay, like you notice there is a synth. So it's kind of like a way of masking the fact that it's a machine and not a human player. Because a human player will actually always, like a violinist or a clarinet player, will always change the sound because of the way you're playing the instrument.
I think as just on the, I guess it's more of a mixing thing, but my immediate reaction to all of this was more. You know, if it's a trailer track, the brass needs to be enormous. The percussion needs to be exciting and massive and out of this world. And particularly the percussion for me felt very tired at the end. Like I think there was a kick sound that was going on, was very repetitive at the end. And I think my immediate response, if this was put in front of me, would be to halve the faders on everything and almost arrange just double everything with something else. Like the brass needs, you need to hear that they're people, and that, like if you've got a cuivre patch, like a really brassy sounding brass patch, that for me is the thing to use, or get the dynamic and the velocities really high, get as much shape as you can. And for me, again, Shane and I've had so much feedback on my trailer tracks in the last 2 weeks, and it's always been the same, more. So I can't stop repeating it. But particularly with the percussion, you need layer upon layer upon layer of percussion on those hits. You need to pick out hit points within the track that are just absurdly massive. And it sounds to me almost like you've arrived at zero headroom in the track already. So I would start and give yourself a chance by just going, vroom, turn everything down, give yourself plenty of room, and then start to just push things up and make them massive. That would be my reaction, because I think there you can achieve more shape. I think everything's been written at, you know, max headroom, and so that's why we've lost a little bit of shape, a little bit of story as a result. And so turn things down and then start hitting things harder again.
I think you can also sorry, just quickly, that you can also I think sort of embellish that in the actual orchestration beyond just the MIDI orchestration. So there's often like these sort of big powerful lines that are kind of, they're almost on their own. You know, so you just have sort of one octave in the violins, and you can easily be doubling that below, or even 2 layers below, and throwing the cellos in it. And there's sometimes, you know, like if you're doubling the horn an octave below the violin, it's almost like we get the perception that they're in the same octave. Or similarly, if you have the cello as 2 octaves below something, it might give the perception that it's only an octave below because of sort of where it speaks in its own range. And so I think you can kind of, like there's parts that are missing this body to it. And that's how you can help to sort of fill that out. You know, and then just sort of traditional doublings, like even if you've got, you know, powerful horn line, throw the bassoon on it as well, and you won't really perceive, you know, the sound of that combined, but it will give a lot more depth to that horn.
Do you really want to mess with your low samples as well? Just throw a contrabassoon in there, just rumbling on it. It really does actually add a lot.
And hire Michael Elderkin.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
I will
I
do
was
it
gonna-
remotely. I've got it right there.
I wanted to follow up on something that that Sam said, because I actually noticed it too. There's like this sort of ostinato line, or like this kick drum line towards the end, which I really I don't know. Again, I need to maybe double check with the original file instead of the Zoom played file. But like that kick drum, I think sticks out a little bit to me because it really sounds quite well. There's two things to it. The first thing is, if you just Google it, there's like specific techniques of mixing the kick drum depending on the style you want, depending if you want it to sound like a pop kick drum or a metal, a rock one. It felt to me like it was missing quite a bit of bottom end, and it was all focused in the sort of in the middle range. So I think it needs to be a bit more boomy, and from a sort of orchestrational point of view, it felt like, as Sam was saying, it needed more. It needed a lot of doubling. To me, it was really calling for taiko drums rather than just a simple kick drum, because that's what you would normally hear in those kind of contexts and situation. And with taikos, you can have ensembles, individual patches. You have also more variety in terms of like where you're hitting the drum, if it's a rim shot or in the center. So like you can just achieve also more beautiful colors, which is another thing that I noticed about it. It was very kind of like flat and had no inflection whatsoever. So just by having maybe a different library that has a few more colors and a few more different kind of hits, you can really make it more less machiney and more interesting and spicy and colorful.
And also another thing regarding the percussions, I think you could be a little bit more coherent with the reverb on the percussion, because I could hear like that boomy big drum at the beginning. It was like drenched in reverb, and then some other drums that sounded like much closer and much drier. So doesn't matter which drums you're using, try to have the whole section of the percussion, like imagine it in one place, and every single instrument has to basically come from that place. And it's not helping you if one drum sounds like you have it here and one.
If I can add one positive thing though, sorry, I just felt like I went on a long run with like feedback, and we all have. I like the first 30 seconds, 40 seconds, the first part of it where there's a lot of, I felt like from a compositional point of view, it was just really, really cool. I loved, like there were a lot of ideas, a lot of synth line, and like it really felt exciting, compelling, driving. So I wish actually there had been more of that also in the second chunk of the track, but like the first part really got me super excited.
Yeah, I agree with what Vincenzo said. The first minute I really, really liked, and
Yeah,
I was like, oh, I can't wait to hear what comes next. And then, as we've all said, we were maybe a little bit disappointed with the orchestral programming, but we're all learning, we're all improving at these things. I was going to say, one of the ways that you really could have improved it, and it's already in your session, because I heard it at like 45 seconds, you do this amazingly cool percussion groove with like what sounds like struck metal or like an anvil or something, like a scrape, it sounds, and then there's like almost like what's functioning as a hi-hat is like an electronic glitch sound. And I'm like, those are your amazing percussion sounds. They're already in your session. Copy them over to the main percussion body of what's playing with the orchestra and use them, incorporate them into your percussion sound to deepen the sound and give it more interest. Because at the moment I'm sure it's not like this, but listening for the first time, it sort of feels like you have one drum in your main orchestral section, and that drum, as cool as it sounds at first, it wears out its welcome quite quickly. So I think you just need lots of different layers going on, lots of a different variety of sounds, so that not any one of them outstays its welcome.
Just to add to that, Shane, if I may, very quickly, as well, just in the structure of the piece, this is for trailer, right? And so it needs to have editable points. It ideally needs to have a vague 3-act structure, and it essentially needs to build up right to the end.
Just to clarify, this is scored to the trailer.
Okay. Right. Okay. Well, in terms of editable points, whatever you've done, I'm sure is fine. But what I would say is wherever there are hit points within that, the tension just has to be absurd. And I think really good ways of doing that with more risers, you could do with some of that. So first thing I would do, which I did yesterday for the first time on my track, was take a percussive hit, bounce it if you need to, and reverse it, and then line it up to your hit point. And immediately you've got a really effective riser that just goes, and it just that up to your next hit, and that will immediately make every single hit point that bit more exciting. You just need to turn the screw towards every single moment like that, especially the end. The end needs a really long, big riser to go with everything else. Yeah, that was just a little idea.
Should we have another quick listen to just that kind of moment when that groove comes in? Because I really enjoyed that too, and I thought that was one of the sort of strongest parts of this. Also, programming-wise, it felt quite balanced.
That's the best part.
Yeah, I'll have another play. So sort of just before that. Cool.
Yeah, so that bit is awesome.
Yeah, I think exploiting that is definitely a good idea.
Nice work, Jolene. I think it's it's all there. It's probably so. I think you can definitely go back to this piece and just kind of embellish these parts out. And I'm sure you have a different sort of lens towards this now compared to when you were kind of applying for the course at the college. So it's I think it's really cool. And there's a lot that you can kind of just build from that. So cool. I think this is a good place to kind of wrap up for the evening.
Yes.
Thank you guys for submitting your work and for us to have a listen and just
Really-
to chat about.
Really beautiful music tonight. I was
Yeah.
very, very impressed.
It's such a pleasure.
Yeah.
Um,
If anybody's really interested in listening to some tasteful integration of electronics and orchestra, listen to Explorers by Jerry Goldsmith. You will not regret it.
So
And also to Between Worlds by Mike Ladisser.
Oh, yes, of course.
shameless
How
plug.
could we not mention that in like 1 hour and 12 minutes of live stream? Well, I will do that. I will sort of like give a little thumbs up to my friend Mike. He put out an album this summer, which is fantastic. It was recorded here in London with a beautiful orchestra full of talented players, and there's some really cool electronics in it. And if anybody is watching and you haven't checked it out yet, go on Spotify right now. Mike Ladusser, Between Worlds, check it out. It's brilliant.
Thank you. Let's try to get above 10 plays on Spotify. What just sort of looking ahead for next week, we're still kind of roughly know what we want to do, but it's I think going to be kind of an integration of kind of sort of show and tell and another opportunity to submit some work and kind of review some stuff that you guys are doing. So I suggest you just stay posted on kind of our socials and look out for what's coming for next Wednesday. Then in 2 weeks' time, we have Kevin Penkin is going to be joining us on the stream, and we're going to be looking at some of his music and his projects. BAFTA-nominated composer Kevin Penkin. So very excited about sort of what's coming up. Thank you guys again, and I hope to see you again next week.
Bye.
Bye.